The bitter wind howled across the open plains, cutting through Amelia Zimmerman's tattered wool coat like it wasn't even there. Her hands, raw and numb, had long since lost their grip on the reins as her wagon lurched to a sickening halt, the front axle splintering beneath her with a crack that echoed across the desolate landscape. December 1879 was proving to be the cruelest month she had ever known. Xavier James pulled his hat lower against the driving snow, squinting into the distance from atop his chestnut gelding. He hadn't planned to be out in this blizzard, but the cattle needed checking before the worst of the storm hit. That's when he saw a broken-down wagon tilted at an impossible angle against the white horizon. "What in tarnation?" he muttered, urging his horse forward. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and night would fall soon. Nobody survived a night like this without shelter. As he approached, Xavier noticed a still form slumped over on the wagon seat, nearly covered in a growing blanket of snow. Dismounting quickly, he trudged through the knee-deep drifts. His gloved hands found the figure of a woman, her face pale as the snow around her, lips tinged with blue. Her breath came in shallow puffs, visible in the frigid air, barely alive but alive nonetheless. "Madam, can you hear me?" Xavier gently brushed snow from her face. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. He didn't recognize her, and Randsburg, Nevada wasn't large enough for strangers to go unnoticed. She must have been passing through when the storm hit. With no time to waste, Xavier made a quick decision. He gathered the woman into his arms, surprised at how little she weighed despite her layers of clothing. Securing her against his chest, he mounted his horse and turned toward home, the woman's frozen body pressed against his as he spurred his mount through the deepening snow. Xavier's cabin stood a mile away, smoke still rising from the chimney thanks to the fire he'd banked before leaving. The woman hadn't stirred during the ride, but he could feel her shallow breaths against his neck. Once inside, he gently laid her on his bed and quickly stoked the fire, adding logs until it roared in the hearth. "Gotta get you warmed up," he murmured, more to himself than to his unconscious guest. Xavier knew enough about the cold to understand that warming her too quickly could be dangerous. He removed her snow-soaked coat and boots, replacing them with dry blankets. Her hands and feet were frighteningly cold, her fingers stiff and white. As the cabin slowly warmed, Xavier prepared hot water and found clean cloths. He gently bathed her face with lukewarm water, noticing for the first time how young she was, perhaps in her early 20s. Her auburn hair, now thawing, fell in damp waves around a face that might have been pretty if not for the deathly pallor. "What's your name?" he wondered aloud. "What were you doing out there alone?" The questions hung in the quiet cabin as Xavier continued his careful ministrations, warming her hands and feet with gentle pressure. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, but inside the fire crackled steadily, casting long shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Hours passed before Amelia stirred. Pain seared through her limbs as feeling slowly returned, and a low moan escaped her lips. Her eyes fluttered open to an unfamiliar ceiling and the smell of wood smoke. "Where?" Her voice cracked, barely audible. Xavier was at her side in an instant, relief evident in his weathered face. "You're safe, miss. Found you half frozen in your broken wagon. Brought you to my cabin to thaw out." Amelia tried to sit up but fell back with a grimace. "My wagon, my supplies." "They'll have to wait until this storm passes," Xavier said firmly. "You nearly died out there. I'm Xavier James. My ranch is about 15 miles northeast of Randsburg." "Amelia Zimmerman," she whispered, her throat raw. "I was heading to California, to my uncle's place near Sacramento." Xavier nodded, offering her a cup of warm broth. Well, Miss Zimmerman, you won't be heading anywhere for a while. This storm's just getting started and your wagon's in bad shape. Amelia accepted the cup with trembling hands. I don't understand. The wheel seemed fine when I started this morning. Not the wheel. The axles splintered clean through. Xavier sat back, studying her face as color slowly returned to her cheeks. What's a young woman doing traveling alone across Nevada in December? Amelia sipped the broth, savoring its warmth as it spread through her chest. I didn't have much choice. My father passed 3 months ago in St. Louis, left nothing but debts. Her eyes took on a distant look. Uncle Thomas is my only living relative. He offered me a place to stay. Xavier frowned. That's a dangerous journey for anyone, let alone a woman alone. I had no other options, Amelia replied with unexpected fire. And I was managing fine until this storm hit. A smile tugged at the corner of Xavier's mouth. She had spirit, this one. Well, Miss Zimmerman, you're welcome to stay until you're recovered and the weather clears. My nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and the town's even further. Amelia's eyes widened as she fully realized her situation alone in a cabin with a stranger miles from anywhere. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition. I couldn't very well leave you to freeze, Xavier said matter-of-factly. Rest now. We'll figure things out tomorrow. As night fell completely, the wind howled around the cabin's corners like a hungry wolf. Xavier made himself a pallet on the floor near the fire, giving Amelia privacy in his bed. Before sleep claimed her, Amelia watched her rescuer through half-closed eyes, wondering what kind of man would risk his life to save a stranger in a blizzard. Morning arrived with eerie silence, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Xavier woke at dawn, his body stiff from sleeping on the hard floor. He added wood to the dying embers and glanced at Amelia, still sleeping soundly in his bed. In daylight, he could better see her features delicate but strong, with a stubborn set to her chin even in sleep. After quietly preparing coffee, Xavier stepped outside to assess the damage. The world had transformed overnight, buried under 3 feet of snow with drifts twice that height against the barn. His horses and cattle had weathered the storm in the sheltered barn, but it would be days before the snow melted enough for travel. Back inside, he found Amelia awake and attempting to stand. "Whoa there," Xavier said, rushing to her side as she swayed dangerously. "You're not ready for that just yet." Amelia stubbornly shook her head. "I can't just lie here. I need to check on my wagon, my things. That'll have to wait. Snow's piled higher than a man's head out there." He guided her back to the bed. "Besides, your feet aren't ready for walking." They were pretty badly frostbitten. For the first time, Amelia looked down at her feet, wrapped in clean bandages. "How bad?" "You'll keep all your toes if that's what you're asking," Xavier said with characteristic bluntness. "But they need time to heal." Amelia's shoulders slumped. "I've already delayed too long. Uncle Thomas is expecting me before Christmas." "Christmas is still 3 weeks away," Xavier reminded her. "If the weather holds, we might be able to retrieve your things in a few days. Until then, you're my guest." Over the next several days, a routine developed between them. Xavier tended his animals and brought in firewood while Amelia, confined to bed at first, gradually began to help with cooking and mending. Her hands, though still tender, could manage simple tasks, and she was determined to earn her keep. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Xavier asked one evening, finishing a stew that put his own simple fare to shame. "This is the best meal I've had since, well, maybe ever." Amelia smiled, pleased by the compliment. "My mother taught me. She believed a woman should know how to run a proper household, even if we were barely keeping one together. She taught you well." Xavier leaned back in his chair, studying her across the table. What happened to your mother, if you don't mind my asking? Amelia's smile faded. Consumption 5 years ago. Father never really recovered from losing her. He started drinking, gambling. By the end, there wasn't much left. Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. My parents died of fever when I was 16, left me this land and not much else. You've done well with it, Amelia observed, glancing around the simple but solid cabin. How long have you been here? 12 years now. Came west from Pennsylvania with nothing but determination and a stubborn streak a mile wide, according to my father. Xavier chuckled at the memory. Worked cattle drives, saved every penny until I could build this place up proper. No wife. The question slipped out before Amelia could stop herself, and she blushed furiously. I'm sorry, that's terribly forward of me. Xavier didn't seem offended. No wife, never found the time or maybe the right woman. He met her eyes briefly before looking away. Life out here doesn't appeal to most ladies. The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence as Xavier stoked the fire and Amelia cleared the table. Despite her initial unease, she found herself growing comfortable in his presence. He was unlike any man she'd known in St. Louis direct, unpolished, but with a quiet integrity that showed in everything he did. As promised, after 4 days, the snow had melted enough for Xavier to ride out to Amelia's wagon. He returned with her trunk and whatever supplies hadn't been ruined by snow or scavenged by animals. I'm afraid your wagon's beyond saving, he told her, setting her trunk beside the bed. Axles completely shattered, and the snow collapsed part of the cover. Amelia bit her lip, mentally calculating what this meant for her journey. I suppose I'll need to find passage on the next stage through Randsburg. Xavier looked uncomfortable. That might be a problem. Stage only comes through once a week this time of year, and the next one isn't due for 5 days. Even then, there's no guarantee they'll have room. Amelia's face fell. I see. You're welcome to stay here until arrangements can be made, Xavier assured her. It's no trouble. And strangely, it wasn't. Xavier found himself enjoying Amelia's company more than he cared to admit. She brought life to his solitary cabin, filling it with the scent of proper cooking and the sound of humming as she worked. Her feet healed slowly but steadily, and soon she was able to move about the cabin with only a slight limp. One evening, a week after her rescue, Xavier returned from tending the livestock to find Amelia standing at his bookshelf, examining his small collection of dog-eared volumes. You like to read, she said, surprise evident in her voice. Xavier felt oddly defensive. When there's time. Winters get long out here. Amelia traced her finger along the spine of the Count of Monte Cristo. This was my father's favorite. He used to read it aloud on winter evenings before. She trailed off, lost in memory. Before things changed, Xavier finished for her. She nodded, returning the book to its place. I didn't expect to find Dumas in a rancher's cabin in Nevada. There's a lot about me you might not expect, Miss Zimmerman. Xavier found himself standing closer to her than he'd intended, close enough to smell the lavender scent of her hair. She'd found the dried sprigs he kept in a drawer and made soap. Another small transformation she'd brought to his life. Amelia looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. I'm beginning to see that, Mr. James. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility, until Xavier cleared his throat and stepped back. I should check on the fire. As he busied himself with the hearth, Xavier silently cursed his awkwardness. At 32, he was no green boy, but something about Amelia Zimmerman unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. She was cultured, educated, headed for a different life entirely once she reached California. Getting attached would only lead to disappointment. The next morning, Xavier announced his intention to ride into Randsburg. Need to pick up supplies and check on the stage schedule for you." Amelia looked up from the shirt she was mending one of his, torn during chores. "Would it be possible for me to accompany you? I've been cooped up so long and my feet are much better." Xavier hesitated. "It's a long ride and still cold." "I'll bundle up warmly," she promised. "Please, Xavier, I'd like to see something beyond these four walls." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the sound of it in her voice weakened his resolve. "All right, but we'll need to start early and be back before dark." The ride to Randsburg took nearly 2 hours through the snow-covered landscape. Xavier was acutely aware of Amelia riding beside him, wrapped in his spare coat and a borrowed scarf. She sat tall in the saddle, surprisingly comfortable on horseback. "You ride well," he observed. Amelia smiled. "Father insisted I learn. Said no daughter of his would be helpless, even if we were city folk." "Wise man." "In some ways," she agreed softly. Randsburg appeared on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings and smoke plumes rising against the blue sky. Despite its small size, the town served as an important stop for travelers and miners heading west. Main Street consisted of a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other establishments necessary for frontier life. As they rode into town, Xavier noticed several heads turning their way. Strangers always attracted attention, but a beautiful woman was a particular novelty. "Ignore the staring," he murmured to Amelia. "They don't mean any harm, most of them anyway." They stopped first at the general store, where Xavier introduced Amelia to the proprietor, Harold Simmons, a portly man with a perpetual smile. "Miss Zimmerman's wagon broke down in the storm last week," Xavier explained. "She's trying to reach California. When's the next stage due?" Harold scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Should be day after tomorrow, weather permitting. But I heard it's already full up with miners heading to the new strike near Sacramento." Amelia's face fell. "When would the next one come through?" "Not until after Christmas, I'm afraid. Winter schedule's always unreliable." Xavier watched Amelia digest this news, her practical nature clearly at war with her disappointment. "I'll inquire at the hotel," she said finally. "Perhaps they know of other travelers heading west who might allow me to join them." While Amelia spoke with the hotel keeper, Xavier completed his shopping, adding items he wouldn't normally purchase: tea, sugar, cookies, a small bottle of rose-scented hair oil. Small comforts for Amelia that his bachelor existence had never required. They met again in front of the saloon, where Xavier needed to speak with the owner about a cattle sale. Amelia's expression was pinched with frustration. "No luck?" Xavier asked. Though he already knew the answer, she shook her head. "No one's heading to California until after the new year, apparently. The hotel has rooms available, but—" Xavier understood her hesitation. A young woman alone at a frontier hotel for weeks would invite gossip at best, danger at worst. "You'll stay with me until arrangements can be made," he said firmly. "It's the sensible option." Amelia looked up at him, gratitude and something else in her green eyes. "You've already done so much. I can't impose further." "It's no imposition." The words came out gruffer than he intended. Their conversation was interrupted by a booming voice from the saloon entrance. "Xavier James, thought that was your horse out front." Xavier turned to see Marshall Perkins, the town's unofficial mayor and owner of the largest ranch in the area. A burly man with a walrus mustache, Perkins had a reputation for fair dealings and a generous nature. "Marshall," Xavier greeted him with a nod. "Good to see you." Perkins' eyes moved to Amelia, curiosity evident. "And who might this lovely lady be?" After introductions were made and Amelia's situation explained, Perkins stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "A predicament, to be sure, But you're in good hands with Xavier, most respected rancher in these parts, despite his youth. Xavier felt a flush creep up his neck at the praise. We should be getting back before the light fades. As they prepared to leave, Perkins pulled Xavier aside. You be careful, son. Pretty girl like that could make a man forget his priorities. Xavier bristled. It's not like that. She needed help, that's all. Perkins raised an eyebrow. If you say so. Just remember, women like her educated, refined, they don't usually settle for frontier life. She's passing through, not putting down roots. The word stung because Xavier had thought the same himself. He nodded curtly and rejoined Amelia, who was waiting by the horses. The ride back was quieter, both of them lost in thought. The sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. It's beautiful here, Amelia said suddenly, in a wild sort of way. Xavier looked at her, surprised. Most city folk find it too empty, too harsh. Perhaps. She smiled slightly. But there's an honesty to it. The land doesn't pretend to be anything but what it is. Inside the cabin, Xavier built up the fire while Amelia unpacked the supplies. The domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on him. This could be their life if things were different, if she weren't just passing through. I got something for you, he said, feeling suddenly awkward as he handed her the small bottle of hair oil. Thought you might. Well, ladies like nice things, and I know you left most of yours behind. Amelia held the bottle as if it were made of gold. That's incredibly thoughtful, her voice caught. Thank you, Xavier. Something in the way she said his name made him bold. I was thinking. If you can't find passage to California before Christmas, maybe you could spend the holiday here. I don't usually do much celebrating, but we could have a proper dinner. Maybe find a tree. Amelia's smile lit her entire face. I'd like that very much. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that began to feel dangerously like permanence. Xavier taught Amelia about ranch life, how to feed the livestock, mend fences, predict weather from the color of the sunset. In return, she brought order and comfort to his home, replacing his haphazard bachelor ways with thoughtful touches. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, curtains appeared on the windows, made from an old shirt she'd repurposed, and meals became events to anticipate rather than necessities to endure. They learned each other's stories in the long evening hours. Xavier told her about his first years on the ranch, the hardships and triumphs. Amelia shared memories of her mother, her education at a ladies' seminary in St. Louis, her dreams of perhaps becoming a teacher someday. You could teach here, Xavier said one evening, then immediately regretted the suggestion when Amelia looked startled. I mean, Randsburg has children but no proper school. Marshall Perkins has been trying to find a teacher for years. I hadn't considered staying in Nevada, Amelia said carefully. My uncle is expecting me. Xavier nodded, looking away. Of course, just a thought. The next day, Xavier rode into town alone to check on the stage schedule. The news wasn't promising. The Christmas stage had been canceled due to heavy snow in the mountain passes. The earliest Amelia could leave would be mid-January. As he rode home, conflicting emotions battled within him. Part of him, a selfish part he wasn't proud of, was glad for the delay. Another month with Amelia under his roof. Another month to know her before she vanished from his life forever. But what was the point? She was bound for California, for a life among people of her own kind. He was a rancher with calloused hands and simple ways. What could he possibly offer that would make her choose this harsh life over the comfort and society she'd find with her uncle? Lost in these thoughts, Xavier almost missed the rider approaching from the east. As they drew closer, he recognized Thomas Wilson, a fellow rancher whose property bordered his own. Xavier, Wilson called, reining in his horse. Glad I caught you. There's trouble brewing. Xavier tensed. What kind of trouble? Wilkes and his boys are back. Stopped at my place looking for you, asking questions about a woman. Cold dread settled in Xavier's stomach. Wilkes was a small-time rustler who had a personal vendetta against Xavier after being caught stealing cattle 2 years earlier. Xavier had testified against him, sending Wilkes to prison for 18 months. What did they want to know about Amelia? Wilson looked confused. Is that her name? They just said they'd heard you had a woman staying with you, seemed mighty interested in the details. Amelia's wagon broke down in the storm. I'm helping her until she can continue to California, Xavier explained tersely. Wilkes is probably looking for any excuse to cause trouble. Wilson nodded grimly. Likely so. Just watch your back, Xavier. Wilkes was drinking heavily and making threats. Said something about settling scores. After thanking Wilson for the warning, Xavier urged his horse to a faster pace, anxiety mounting with each mile. He should never have left Amelia alone, not with Wilkes in the area. Relief flooded him when the cabin came into view, smoke rising peacefully from the chimney. Inside, he found Amelia kneading bread dough, humming softly to herself. She looked up with a smile that faded when she saw his expression. What's wrong? Xavier removed his hat, unsure how much to tell her. Stage won't be running until mid-January. Passes are snowed in. Oh, Amelia's hands stilled in the dough. I see. There's something else. Xavier decided honesty was best. A man named Wilkes is in the area. He's spent time in prison for cattle rustling. He and I have a history and he's been asking about you. Amelia's eyes widened. About me? Why? To get to me, most likely. Xavier ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I should never have left you alone. I can handle myself, Amelia said, though her voice betrayed her nervousness. What do you think he'll do? I don't know. Wilkes is unpredictable, especially when he's been drinking. Xavier moved to check that his rifle was loaded. Until he moves on, we need to be careful. No going outside alone, especially after dark. That evening they sat closer to the fire than usual, the threat of Wilkes casting a shadow over their previously comfortable routine. Xavier found himself watching the windows, listening for sounds beyond the normal creaks and groans of the cabin. Tell me about your dreams, Amelia said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. What do you want from your life here? Xavier looked at her, surprised by the question. Never gave it much thought beyond the next season, the next year. Build up the herd, make the ranch profitable, expand the boundaries maybe. No personal dreams, family. There was something in her voice he couldn't quite identify. Xavier stared into the fire. Used to dream of that. A wife, children running around the yard, someone to share the work, the land. He shrugged. But out here, opportunities are limited. Most women want more than a hardscrabble ranch life. Not all women, Amelia said softly. Their eyes met across the small space, and Xavier felt something shift between them, a boundary crossed, a possibility acknowledged. Amelia, he began, but was cut off by the sound of hoofbeats approaching the cabin. Xavier was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Get back, away from the windows. Amelia obeyed, pressing herself against the wall near the fireplace as Xavier cautiously approached the door. Through the small window he could make out 3 riders in the fading light. Xavier James, a voice called, slurred with alcohol. Come out and talk, you son of a bitch, Wilkes, Xavier muttered, his jaw tight. And he's drunk. Amelia's face had gone pale. What does he want? Nothing good. Xavier checked his rifle again. Stay inside no matter what happens. Before she could protest, Xavier opened the door just enough to call out, It's late, Wilkes. Whatever you want can wait until morning. Wilkes, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, laughed harshly. Heard you got yourself a woman, James. Keeping her all to yourself, are you? That's not very neighborly. The two men with him, rough-looking cowboys Xavier didn't recognize, chuckled appreciatively. "My guest's business is none of yours, Wilkes," Xavier replied evenly, though his blood was boiling. "I suggest you move on before this gets ugly." Wilkes spat on the ground. "It's already ugly. You cost me 18 months of my life with your testimony. Figure you owe me something in return." "You cost yourself those months when you stole my cattle," Xavier countered. "Now leave before I'm forced to defend my property." For a tense moment it seemed Wilkes might back down. Then Amelia appeared beside Xavier in the doorway, a second rifle in her hands. "You heard him," she said, her voice steady despite the fear Xavier could sense in her. "Leave us be." Wilkes's eyes narrowed as he took in the sight of Amelia. Well, she's prettier than the rumors said. No wonder you're keeping her hidden away." Xavier moved slightly in front of Amelia. "Last warning, Wilkes." The standoff might have ended there if one of Wilkes's companions hadn't decided to take matters into his own hands, spurring his horse forward with a yell. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Xavier raised his rifle as Wilkes, and the third man also charged forward. A shot rang out from Amelia's rifle. Xavier realized with shock, and the leading rider tumbled from his horse with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. Xavier fired a warning shot above Wilkes's head, but the man was already reaching for his pistol. Another shot, this one from Xavier, caught Wilkes in the arm, causing him to drop his weapon with a howl of rage. The third rider, seeing his companions wounded, wheeled his horse around and fled into the gathering darkness. Wilkes, bleeding but still in the saddle, leveled a venomous glare at Xavier. "This isn't over," he snarled, before turning his horse to follow his retreating companion, leaving their wounded friend moaning on the ground. Xavier approached the fallen man cautiously, rifle still raised. "Get up. You can ride out with your friends, or I can take you to the sheriff." "Your choice." The man struggled to his feet, his left shoulder bleeding steadily. "You'll regret this," he muttered, but his heart wasn't in the threat. With Xavier's help, he mounted his horse and rode slowly after Wilkes. Once they were gone, Xavier turned to find Amelia still standing in the doorway, the rifle now trembling in her hands. He gently took it from her, setting both weapons aside. "Are you all right?" he asked, searching her face. Amelia nodded, though her complexion was ashen. "I shot a man," she whispered, as if just realizing it herself. "You winged him," Xavier corrected, "and probably saved both our lives in the process." He guided her back inside, securing the door behind them. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Father taught me," Amelia said, sinking into a chair by the fire. "Said a woman should know how to protect herself. I never thought I'd actually have to do it." Xavier poured her a small measure of whiskey from the bottle he kept for medicinal purposes. "Drink this. It'll help with the shock." Amelia took a sip, grimacing at the burn but accepting the comfort it offered. "Will they come back?" "Not tonight. They'll lick their wounds first." Xavier sat across from her, suddenly exhausted. "But we should ride into town tomorrow, report this to Sheriff Davis. Wilkes won't give up easily." They sat in silence for a long while, processing what had happened. Finally, Amelia spoke, her voice small in the quiet cabin. "I was terrified, but also, I've never felt so alive." She looked up at Xavier, her eyes bright in the firelight. "Is that strange?" Xavier shook his head. "It's the frontier. Makes you face things you never thought you could handle and discover you're stronger than you knew." "I think I understand now," Amelia said slowly. "Why you love it here. Despite the dangers, the isolation, there's a freedom in this life that doesn't exist in the city." Xavier felt his heart race at her words. Was it possible she could come to love this place as he did? Could she see herself building a life here? Before he could find the courage to ask, Amelia stood and moved to stand before him. Without warning, she leaned down and pressed her lips to his in a brief, gentle kiss. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving my life. Again." Then she was gone, retreating to the curtained-off area that had become her sleeping space, leaving Xavier staring after her, his fingers touching his lips where hers had been moments before. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the events of the previous night seeming almost dreamlike in the winter sunshine. Xavier rose early, checking the perimeter of the cabin before Amelia woke. There was no sign of Wilkes or his companions, but Xavier knew better than to believe the danger had passed. Over breakfast, they discussed their plan. "We'll ride into Randsburg, speak to Sheriff Davis, and send a telegram to your uncle explaining the delay," Xavier said, trying to keep his tone businesslike despite the memory of Amelia's kiss. "You can stay at the hotel if you'd feel safer there." Amelia looked up sharply. "I'm not afraid to stay here." "I didn't say you were," Xavier replied carefully, "but it might be prudent given the circumstances. Is that what you want, for me to stay in town?" There was a challenge in her voice. Xavier met her gaze steadily. "What I want and what's sensible might be two different things." Amelia's expression softened. "After last night, I'm not sure I know what's sensible anymore." The ride to Randsburg was tense, both of them scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. They reached town without incident and went directly to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Davis, a former Texas Ranger with a reputation for fairness, listened to their account of the confrontation with Wilkes without interruption. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair with a grim expression. "Wilkes is a troublemaker, always has been, but this is bolder than his usual stunts." The sheriff stroked his silver mustache thoughtfully. "I'll send some men to look for him, but my guess is he's already left the area. Men like that don't usually stick around after being shot." "Will you be able to find him?" Amelia asked. Davis shrugged. "Territory's big, miss, but we'll try. In the meantime, I suggest you both keep your eyes open. Wilkes has a mean streak, especially when his pride's been hurt." After sending a telegram to her uncle in California explaining the situation, Xavier and Amelia discussed their options over lunch at the town's small restaurant. "The hotel has rooms available," Xavier said, though the words felt like stones in his mouth. "It might be safer for you here." Amelia studied him over her cup of coffee. "Is that what you're advising as a sensible precaution?" Xavier hesitated. The sensible answer was yes, but it wasn't the one he wanted to give. "I think you'd be safe at the ranch," he said finally. "We handled Wilkes once. We can do it again if necessary." A small smile touched Amelia's lips. "Then that's where I'll stay. After all, we still have Christmas plans to consider." The days leading up to Christmas were filled with a strange mixture of tension and joy. Xavier doubled his vigilance, never going far from the cabin and keeping his rifle close at hand. But there was also a new awareness between him and Amelia, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings that had grown beyond simple friendship or gratitude. 3 days before Christmas, Xavier surprised Amelia by bringing home a small pine tree he'd cut from the hillside behind the barn. "You said you wanted a proper Christmas," he explained, somewhat embarrassed by her delight. "Thought we should do it right." They spent the evening decorating the tree with items found around the cabin: paper cutouts, dried berries strung on thread, even a few precious glass ornaments Xavier produced from a trunk he rarely opened. "These were my mother's," he explained, handing Amelia a delicate glass star. "She brought them all the way from Pennsylvania when my parents came west. Said Christmas wasn't Christmas without proper ornaments." Amelia held the star reverently. She must have been a remarkable woman. She was. Xavier watched as Amelia carefully placed the star at the top of the tree. "You remind me of her sometimes." She had the same determination, the same ability to make a home wherever she found herself. The compliment brought a blush to Amelia's cheeks. I'm not sure I deserve such a comparison. I haven't done much with my life yet. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Xavier said softly. Not many city-raised ladies could survive what you have these past weeks. Christmas Eve arrived with no further sign of Wilkes or his men. A fresh snowfall had blanketed the landscape, transforming the ranch into a pristine wonderland. After dinner, Xavier produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It isn't much," he said, suddenly self-conscious as he handed it to Amelia, "but I wanted you to have something to open tomorrow." Amelia looked surprised. "Xavier, you shouldn't have. I don't have anything for you. You've given me plenty," he assured her. "Having you here, it's been the best gift I could ask for." Amelia carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small leather-bound journal with her initials stamped on the cover. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the soft leather. "Thought you might like to write down your adventures," Xavier explained. "Your journey west has certainly provided plenty of material." Amelia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Thank you, not just for this, but for everything. You saved my life, gave me shelter, protected me." She trailed off, emotion making her voice unsteady. Xavier moved to sit beside her on the small sofa they'd pulled close to the fire. "I've been thinking," he said, choosing his words carefully, "about what happens when the pass is clear and the stage starts running again." Amelia went very still. "Yes, I know you have plans. Your uncle is expecting you, and California offers opportunities that Nevada can't match." Xavier took a deep breath. "But I want you to know that if you ever wanted to, if you could see yourself staying here, there'd be a place for you. A place." Amelia repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Xavier met her eyes, vulnerability and hope warring in his expression. "More than a place. A home. A life, if you wanted it, with me." The silence that followed seemed endless. Amelia's eyes searched his face, and Xavier felt as though she could see straight through to his soul. "Are you asking me to marry you, Xavier James?" she asked finally, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the question. Xavier swallowed hard. "I reckon I am, though I know it's sudden and probably foolish. We've known each other barely a month, but I've learned more about you in that time than I've known about anyone in years." "And what have you learned?" Amelia's expression was unreadable. "That you're brave, resourceful, kind, but not soft. That you face life head-on, no matter what it throws at you." Xavier took her hand, his calloused fingers enveloping her smaller ones. "That I love you, and the thought of watching you ride away on that stage feels like having my heart torn out." Tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks now, but she was smiling. "I've learned things too, about myself, about what I truly want." She squeezed his hand. "I came west looking for safety, for the comfort of family, but I think what I really wanted was a place to belong, someone to belong to." Hope surged in Xavier's chest. "And have you found that?" "I have." Amelia's free hand came up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I love you too, Xavier. I think I have since that first morning when I woke to find you'd risked your life to save mine." Xavier pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their newfound love. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "So that's a yes?" he asked, a smile tugging at his mouth. Amelia laughed, the sound like music in the quiet cabin. "Yes, Xavier James, I'll marry you. Though my uncle might think I've lost my mind, choosing a Nevada rancher over California society. We'll invite him to the wedding," Xavier promised. "Show him that his niece has found happiness, even in this wild country." Christmas morning dawned with a clarity and brilliance that seemed to reflect their joy. Xavier woke early, as was his habit, to find Amelia already up and preparing breakfast. She greeted him with a smile that made his heart skip, the simple domesticity of the scene a preview of the life they would build together. After breakfast, they bundled up to check on the livestock, walking hand in hand through the snow to the barn. The world felt new, possibilities stretching before them like the untouched snowfields surrounding the ranch. "What will we tell people in town?" Amelia asked as they returned to the cabin, cheeks flushed from the cold. "About how we met, how this happened so quickly." Xavier considered this. "The truth, I suppose, that I found you half frozen in a broken wagon and carried you home to Thaw, and somewhere along the way we fell in love." "It sounds like something from a storybook when you put it that way," Amelia said, laughing. "Sometimes life is stranger than stories," Xavier replied, pulling her close. "Who would have thought a blizzard and a broken wagon would lead to this?" They were married in the spring, after the snow melted and the wildflowers began to carpet the hills around the ranch. The ceremony was small but joyful, held in Randsburg's newly built church with most of the town in attendance. Marshall Perkins stood as Xavier's best man, while Amelia's Uncle Thomas, who had indeed been shocked by her decision, but came to appreciate Xavier's solid character, gave the bride away. "Never seen James smile so much," Sheriff Davis remarked to his wife during the reception. "Amazing what the right woman can do for a man." As for Lee Wilkes, he was eventually caught and returned to prison, this time for a longer sentence that included the attempted attack on Xavier's ranch. The frontier justice that many had predicted came not from violence, but from the law taking its proper course. Xavier and Amelia's first year of marriage brought challenges, as all marriages do, but also immeasurable joy. Amelia's education found purpose when she began teaching the children of neighboring ranchers 3 days a week in the front room of their cabin. Xavier's cattle business flourished under their combined management, her head for figures complementing his knowledge of ranching. In the summer of 1881, their family grew with the birth of a son they named Joseph, after Xavier's father. As Xavier held his newborn child with Amelia watching tiredly but happily from their bed, he marveled at how completely his life had changed in the span of 18 months. "What are you thinking?" Amelia asked, reaching out to touch his arm. Xavier smiled, settling beside her with their son cradled between them. "I'm thinking that a broken wagon turned out to be the greatest blessing of my life." Amelia agreed, her eyes drifting closed. "Though I wouldn't recommend freezing half to death as a way to find a husband." Xavier laughed softly. "No, but I would recommend being stubborn enough to survive until help arrives, and brave enough to shoot a man who threatens your home." "Our home," Amelia corrected sleepily. "For as long as we both shall live." As winter approached again that year, Xavier often found himself thinking back to that fateful December day when he'd spotted a broken-down wagon in the snow. How close he had come to taking a different route, to missing Amelia entirely. How easily she might have perished before he found her. The thought made him hold her tighter at night, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. Their life wasn't always easy. The Nevada frontier demanded resilience and hard work, but it was rich with purpose and love. In December 1889, 10 years after that first meeting, Xavier and Amelia stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their 3 children play in the snow. Joseph, now 8, and his younger siblings, Catherine and Thomas. The ranch had grown prosperous under their care, with a larger herd, more acreage, and a reputation for quality that spread beyond Nevada's borders. 10 years, Xavier mused, his arm around Amelia's waist. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you in that wagon." Amelia leaned into his embrace, her head resting on his shoulder. "And sometimes it feels like I've always been here, like this has always been my home." "It has," Xavier said simply. "You just took a while to find it." As the children's laughter echoed across the snow-covered yard, Xavier silently thanked the broken wagon, the blizzard, and all the circumstances that had conspired to bring Amelia into his life. What had begun as a rescue had become the foundation of a love that would endure through all the seasons of their lives. As enduring as the Nevada landscape, they both called home.